the shots.
Absolutely. It's wonderful to meet you. Thank you so much. Talking to you in warm Arizona. We're coming from cold Kansas City. So thank you for taking a minute out.
But
So let's get into your life here. And before we do, I want to know with the work that you're doing, obviously, a lot of seismic tremors from COVID-19 and living through a
mhm.
pandemic probably was a part of your landscape. How much of that in this new year of 2025 are you still feeling from going through that time period?
I think we're finally starting to shake it off.
Yeah.
I do think that we are returning to some level of normalcy. I do recall back in, I want to say, beginning of 2023, I gave a big presentation to a large group of people, and I said, "Buckle up, you guys! Like it isn't over. We're just beginning." And I will say, I got some hate mail after that.
Yeah.
That my message wasn't necessarily very hopeful, but I knew that there were going to be so many ripple effects. I really do think that we are starting to shake it off now and kind of walk around with a little more confidence.
Yeah. It almost feels like sometimes I feel like the rapture happened. There was a show on HBO called Left Behind, and and the reason why I remember that, I read the book, but I remember the day was October 14th was the day of the rapture, and my birthday's on the 13th, and I was like, why did they pick that day? The day after I was born, everybody gets sucked up into the sky. How did this happen? So, but I remember, I still think that all of us hit this existential crossroads in our lives. And
Mhm,
we had a choice to make with the rest of our lives, especially of our age, because the sun's
mhm.
not rising now. It's kind of like slowly going down, and we got to go for it. So, yeah, I know. And
Agreed.
I feel the same way. I'm starting to get old man thoughts. But it's like I think that all of us, young and old, feel this kind of like renewed vigor of being alive on this
hmm
planet,
hmm
you know?
I again, you and I are older, so this isn't really a great um, connector, but I do remember when we were coming out of 9/11,
Yeah.
right? And just kind of that feeling of once you were coming out of it, it still sat with you, but you were able to forget about it
Yeah.
during the day and really go on to boring day-to-day nuance things. And
Yeah.
that's where I think we are. I do a lot of work with kids and young adults. And so I polled about 75 kids last year for this presentation that I was going to give to their parents. And I actually said to them, like, you tell me, this is beginning of 2024. You tell me what you want your parents to know about what you're experiencing now in high school. And one of the number one things they said was, I don't want to talk about pandemic anymore. I don't
Right.
want anybody to keep telling me how I've had it so hard and, making excuses for me and tiptoeing. I don't want to hear about the pandemic anymore. And I was like, wow, but I get it. Like they just want to live their lives.
You know, it's interesting because I was going to put this question to rest after 2024, but I'm trying to reshape it because it really was seismic for a lot of us. But I get it
Yeah.
with the kids.
Yeah.
And maybe the reason why I'm doing this and we're talking about like getting over trauma, I was in the back of a water taxi on the morning of September 11th, 2001, and had to find my way back to America. My flight from Paris to Kansas City didn't exist within 3 days.
Yeah.
But I
No.
but I actually went to the poor man's Riviera. I went to Vernaz, an old hippie commune, and spent some time there, and really kind of found my way to London, and found my way back home. I felt like I was in a Hemingway novel, but I think that time period there was just no escape for me because I just kept thinking, oh my God, what's going to happen? What country am I coming home to? And all of those things. But you know, I get it when you've walked that tightrope of feeling the stages of grief through trauma, you got to let it go. You got to let it go into the ocean.
At some point, it is healthy too. I mean,
Yeah.
you absolutely need to sit in it for a
Yeah.
while. I think our culture is very bad about that.
Right.
I think we want to hop out of discomfort as quickly as we can. Something like 9/11 and pandemic, we couldn't. But if you take traditional day-to-day trauma, we want to either ignore it, put a band-aid over it, go back into our daily lives. We are a culture of dust yourself off and get back up.
Yep.
Where what happens for all of us is that, or mental health professionals, what we're seeing is that 15, 20 years later, all of that unresolved trauma is coming out in another way, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you need to sit with trauma for a while. But to your point, eventually it will be healthy to turn the corner and just kind of recommit to your life, even
For
if it's
sure.
a new life.
For sure. So
Let's
Jill,
go.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get to the heart and soul of what you do on a daily basis. And to do that, I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of grade school kids. It's career day. And one of the kids in the back of the room is curious and is like, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" What's your answer?
My answer to the young kids would be that I am a mental health therapist, and I help people. If I was talking to somebody young, I would say I help people that are sad feel better. If I was talking to teenagers, I would be honest and say that what I do for a living is I sit with individuals specifically that have experienced a loss to suicide. And I help friends and family members cope with and carry on after that complicated and difficult loss. What I'm
So,
doing now is
yes,
specifically focusing on gun violence survivors. So I've worked in suicide loss, not suicide prevention, Joe. That's very different than what
yes,
I do. I've
yes.
worked in suicide loss for about 20 years. There aren't a lot of me in this country. It's a very bizarre and strange niche.
Yeah.
But I've also dedicated what I think is the next chapter, if not the last big chapter of my life, to supporting and guiding gun violence survivors, because I think that that is a population in our society that is growing and not going to slow down anytime in the near future. And they're not necessarily getting the support that they need to overcome their trauma and turn that corner in their life.
So, what did you want to be when you were in the third grade? What was your dream?
A librarian.
Good for you. That would be fun, wouldn't it? I worked at Barnes and Noble at one point, and I had a great time.
Ooh.
I tried to read while I was working, but it didn't work. But I love that world. Just
Could
didn't
you
work out.
imagine me now, though? Like, I'm too loud and boisterous, and I love a
Right.
microphone. Like, I could never have been a
Yeah.
librarian.
No way. No way. Unless it was a loud library, which that could be an advent. That could totally be a thing, you know?
I'm good.
Why not? So
Could we be live music in the
you,
library? Like,
that's
could
what I'm
we
saying. Why
boom,
not a
boom,
why
boom,
not a loud
boom?
one? Because you can put cans on. I mean, my son's on the spectrum, and I've been in the special needs world. If you need to put cans on and filter the world out, it's easy to
Yeah,
do these days.
it
You
is
know,
different times.
it is. So, how did you get here? Talk to me a little bit about your career trajectory. Take me back to the beginnings of your life where you were born and raised. What were these seeds of empathy and helping people through dark times, being the flashlight? How did that happen?
I'm a Colorado girl, and I will say, I've asked myself that question before because I think we all can look at our own families and look around and go like, how did why am I this way and they're that way? And how did we all come from the same two people?
Yeah.
Um, what I came up with was the reality that I experienced trauma for the first time at 6 years old. My mother and I were actually carjacked at that time. At that stage in life, there really weren't um, any carjackings. It was not a thing, it was not a term. So the police department labeled it as a kidnapping.
Wow.
And we were dropping my sister off at the mall. Some very clean-cut gentlemen approached us in the parking lot, told us they had a flat tire, asked my mom if she would give them a ride to a friend's house. Begrudgingly, and after a lot of back and forth, my mom agreed to that. And eventually, what ended up happening within 15, 20 minutes is the gentleman in the back seat pulled a gun on me. And, my mom looked in the rearview mirror and knew that we were in serious trouble. So, it is one of those childhood traumatic situations where all ended up okay. I came from a very strong family. There was a lot of support. But Joe, take yourself back a few years. I mean, back in those days, like kids didn't receive counseling. That
No.
wasn't a thing,
Mm-mm.
right? And my parents really believed that it was in my best interest if they didn't talk about it again, right? So if we don't talk about it and lament on it over and over again, Jill's going to be okay.
Yeah.
We don't want a reminder. So, I mean, all in all, I really did come out of that.
Yeah.
And of course, I've done my own psychological work. But when I go back and I try to figure out where I am, why I am who I am and where that all came from, I kind of take it back to that moment. I
Yeah.
think from a very young age, I viewed the world differently,
Yeah.
right?
So I'm curious, do you ever look at that moment and think there's so many things that are pivotal in our existence that that was what opened the door for you to find this life that you have and you're comforted by it? Or is there still parts of it where you're like, maybe something else could have happened? How do you deal with that fork in the road, that Robert Frost moment for you?
Um, I really, it isn't a fork in the road for me.
Right.
Yeah, I feel pretty confident that um I am as emotionally secure as I am
Yeah.
because of that event.
Yeah.
Because I had to learn from early on to self-soothe, to pull myself up and out of, to I viewed people not as victims and perpetrators, but I just realized for some reason from early on that everybody was carrying something. I was curious about the perpetrators. I remember that as a kid,
Yeah.
right? That's how my brain worked. I was curious about them. Um, Always like, why?
Yeah.
And what was going on in their lives. And then when I graduated from college, I went to go work for a district court judge. And that's when really it all came together, right? I was a court clerk. I sat in criminal proceedings all day long. I watched these defendants stand at a podium, shaking, sometimes not, in front of the judge. And I just couldn't stop. I was so curious, like,
Yeah.
what brought you here? How
Yeah.
did you get to this place that you were beating your brother, with a fire poker?
Yeah.
What
Right.
occurred? And this is going to change your life. Like standing in this courtroom right now, even if you realize that what you've done has made a huge mistake, it's going to forever change your life. So I've just always been curious about what makes people behave in certain ways, I think.
So, who's been that hero for you? Who's been that inspiration in your career? Because you're dealing with heavy stuff. Who has been that bedrock in your life?
First and foremost, it was the judge that I worked for.
Wow.
He was the first individual who was not a parent. And I think that's important. I think we all need somebody who is not a parent because if we're lucky, our parents are going to believe in us, right? And our parents are going to tell us that we're capable and our parents are going to push us. We stop hearing it after a while. And the judge post college would tell me every day um, that I needed to do more. He'd be like, "Why are you here?"
Yeah.
When I interviewed with him, day one, I was 2 days out of undergrad, and I sat in his chambers. I was shaking like a leaf because it was my first big girl interview that wasn't, at the mall. And he was like, "So when are you going to grad school?"
Yeah.
I thought the man was off his rockers. I was like, "Are
Right.
you kidding me? Like, I hate school. I just graduated school." He's like, "Hmm." And, 4 years later, I, after him telling me you're capable, you have something different, you look at people, Jill, and you see the good in them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I just needed somebody from the peripheral to whisper in my ear over and over again that I could do more. That's so great. Not everybody has that, Joe. I
Yeah.
mean, what a gift.
Well, that's the thing about age, though. We don't get that when we're young because there's people that definitely can see things. They sense, they feel it. When you're on this planet long enough, you just get that sense. And we need
Yeah.
those people in our lives to say, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
Why are you doing this? You need to be doing something else. And
Yeah.
it may not be pretty sometimes, but it needs to be said.
Right.
Then we can thank them later on. So,
Agreed.
um,
Agreed.
so let me ask you this. If you could meet one person on the planet right now that you find inspirational, that would help you in your career and in your life, spend some time with them, who would you love to meet and be around?
Um, you know what? Probably Anderson Cooper.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Different answer, right?
Yeah, I
Different.
like that.
Probably Anderson Cooper. He is a soulful, multifaceted, yet like the guy you want to have live next door to you because
Uh-huh.
he can be so real and
Uh-huh.
fun at the
Yep.
same time. I mean, there's so many layers to that man. I
Oh
don't
my
know if
God.
you've heard his grief podcast. He has an
No.
incredible, incredible grief podcast that came out 2 years ago.
Yeah.
He's on his second season, but he has changed the landscape of um, grief work.
Yeah. Well, his mom was Gloria Vanderbilt, And
Yeah.
he came from this high end stock. He could have done anything.
Yeah.
Could have been a trust fund baby. Could have turned into something bad, which happens sometimes when you come from that environment. But he's definitely a grounded guy, and I think his lifestyle is one that he, you know, probably has been a part of his grief too, having to endure every day everybody's stereotypes and judgments.
Yep.
But he's always plowed through. Yeah, I think that would be a totally. He seems like the kind of guy that you would have a couple drinks with. Like when I see him at New Year's Eve with
Yep.
Andy doing his thing, it's
Yep.
like they just seem like they're having a good time. It's going to be real. It's not going to be because that world of celebrity and Hollywood can just be way too plastic, I think. But he seems like,
And to your point, he came from a lineage of money,
yeah,
right? Old money
yeah,
and new money. With
yeah,
his mom's success, he could be a completely different person, but he's not. So where, where it all kind of started for him was that his brother died by suicide. When
oh,
he, so I think his, I'm gonna get it wrong, but I think his brother was somewhere around 21 years old, and that was his only sibling. And his brother jumped from their penthouse apartment in Manhattan, and that changed things for Anderson. So what he did is he dove into his journalism. It
yeah,
was just at the very beginning of his career. So
yeah,
again, my mind's so curious as to what makes people behave the way that they do.
true,
He dove into war and other cultures and other people in pain and hurting because he couldn't handle his own pain,
yep,
right? So he went to other countries and
totally,
sat in their stuff to forget about his own. So it's interesting now. I don't know, I'm going to guess he's probably close to 50.
yeah,
He's just now grieving the loss of his brother, his father, and his mother, but he's doing it very
yeah.
publicly, and I just find that so um, extraordinary.
Yeah, absolutely it is. So let me ask you this. Dealing with heavy things that you have to deal with, you're taking care of people, giving a lot of yourself, but you have to evolve and develop as a human being. How do you parlay and balance all of that in your life?
Um, so my side gig is that I'm an indoor cycle instructor.
Okay.
So I taught a spin class this morning,
Yeah.
actually, right before I joined you, and I teach another one tonight.
Yeah.
As silly as that sounds, what I've come to notice is that my self-care routine involves dopamine.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm not a dopamine junkie. I'm not a risk taker at all. I'm not that person, but it's healthy dopamine. Like
Yeah.
I need some cardio because that takes me to a different place.
Yeah.
Mentally, it lets me leave behind the images that I've seen. I used to serve as a first responder to the scene of suicides.
Well,
And when a suicide would occur locally in town, I would go with a team of volunteers and we would arrive to the home as quickly as we could while the fire department and police department and detectives were all still there to support the family as quickly as we could to then stop the cycle of suicide within families.
yeah.
But what I'm saying is there's a lot of images
Yeah.
and there's a lot of other people's pains and hurts trapped up in here, right? So I find things like meditation, I cold plunge, um I work really, it's taken time, but I work really hard to kind of separate mentally when I can.
So
And
if
it's a
every
challenge.
Yeah, oh, totally it is. Being a human being on this planet is enough, and then finding ways to cope. So let me ask you this: of all of these things that you've done with your life, and more importantly, where you've evolved to at this point, what are you the proudest of?
I think probably this chapter. I
Yeah,
think where I am now, and you just said it, Joe, maybe I've evolved to this place.
yeah, yeah. So let me ask you this: if you could talk to that very young version of you
Mm.
after the carjacking and everything happened, and you could give that version of you a piece of advice, you run into that version of you in a dream. Based on the wisdom and the life that you've led up to this point, what advice would you impart on that young version of you?
I think don't stop.
Yeah,
It would be that simple. It would be don't stop. And, we all find reasons to pivot. We all find reasons to leave our dreams behind. Somebody has said, doesn't have faith in us. Somebody has said that we're not smart enough. Somebody has said that that's just not our road. And it takes a different mindset to keep going despite what
Yeah.
the world is, maybe what the message that the world is telling you. Yeah.
So, of all of these images that you've had to see and all of the people that you've helped, and there's a lot of grief in there, do you have hope for humanity? Do you ever waver on that?
Oh, I very rarely waver on that.
Yeah.
When I am psychologically fatigued, as many of us have been in this country for the past few years, I will start to waver. But as a whole, I am a firm believer, hands down, that all humans are good,
Yeah. Yeah. I
first
and
and foremost.
I agree. And I think the beauty of doing podcasting is that I think it's such a therapeutic realm. I think there's so much positivity that's going on with human beings, of all of us going towards the same kinds of things. And unfortunately, with the news, it bleeds, it leads. There's all of this spotlight on things that are going to divide us. But at the end of the day, there's so many people out there that are really genuinely doing things that are valorous, full of integrity, that are really trying to lift each other up and their families and their people.
But isn't it interesting these days that that isn't what sells?
It
So
never
you
does.
just said something. You just said something, right? I mean, all
Yeah.
these messages that we are receiving all day long, the heroes, or, as we're taping this, it is around the time of the LA fires.
Yeah.
And we're not being fed images of the individuals that are standing on the side of the highway rescuing the dogs and the deer
Yep.
and those feel goods.
Yep.
Instead, we're being barraged with the images that our brains have been trained to respond
Yep.
to,
Yep.
which is destitute and drama.
Yep.
And it is all awful, but man, we are not being fed goodness very
We aren't.
often anymore.
We are not. So at the end of the day, Jill, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, everyone that knows you, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Zany, quirky, loud, passionate, um, a shade of gray. I don't believe in black and white.
Yeah.
I am 100% walking and breathing a shade of gray.
Yeah.
Um, Transparent,
Yeah.
obnoxious sometimes.
It we all have our peccadillos. So let me ask you this. We get off the call, time machine pulls up in front of your house. You can go anywhere in the history of human time and see one event with your own eyes. Where do you want to go?
Listen here, you podcast expert, throwing these great questions at me. Where do I want to go? Uh, Maybe to the Titanic.
Okay.
Even though I know the end result, I've
Right.
always been a little obsessed with Titanic.
There's a place called Branson here in Missouri, and it's this big kind of touristy place. They have a Titanic exhibit, and I've never been a big Titanic person. I like the movie. I'm into it, but when I walked through there, I was like, oh my God, like all these
Mhm.
relics, the whole story. At one point, at the very end, they have a big thing of water, and you put your fist in, and it was the temperature of the water, and it wanted you to see how long you could keep your hand in there. I mean, you could only keep it in there for like
Uh-uh.
10 or 15 seconds. I mean, when I pulled it out, it took me like 10 minutes to just warm to a decent temperature. It's wild how all that transpired.
Yeah, and I think you've just named it. Like I think what I'm attracted to is maybe because I know the ending. So I am attracted to the heroism and I am attracted to like that dichotomy of these people that thought that they were going on an expedition of a lifetime and all of the valor and the prestige associated with that. And wow.
Yeah, it was insane.
Yeah.
So, anyone wants to hire you, reach out, learn more. They have questions, any of the good business, where do they go?
They go to my website, which is jillmcmahoncounseling.com.
Okay. Jill, this has been wonderful. What a wonderful, radiant soul. Thank you for your
Hmm.
time. Thank you for your
Thank you, Joe.
story, and keep doing the wonderful work.
I appreciate it. I appreciate you highlighting my work.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been my pleasure. Thank you.